Welcome everyone to another session of two firms having a discussion on a topic. Today we're going to focus specifically on the idea of what happens when a business or a small company is owned between two people that are married and then their marriage ends, but the business wants to continue. My name is Jubin, Dana with Dana Legal Services. We focus on intellectual property, patents, and trademarks. And I'll let Kyle introduce himself. Go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, everyone, how you doing? I'm Kyle Kaufman. I'm an attorney. I'm in Wisconsin, Sheboygan, Wisconsin, Random Lake, Wisconsin, right on Lake Michigan. We focus on family law at our law firm, divorces, child custody proceedings, paternity actions, really anything dealing with relationships between spouses and their kids. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for making time to join us. So today we're going to talk about one type of child of a marriage, which is business. We're not talking about physical people, but we're talking about children that are born as a business from a couple. So let's say that there's a couple, right? They get married and together they start a business and they go down this path, and then suddenly the business takes off, but the marriage doesn't. So the marriage is about to end and the business is taken off. Tell me a little bit about what are some of the questions that people ask you when they're married and co-own a business, and then they want to separate, but the business needs to continue.
Yeah, for sure. I actually see that pretty often. Had a conversation with somebody this morning about that very thing. So I guess my question back to you is, from whose perspective, right? Is it the, is it the spouse that, was, really a lesser player in the business, or is it a spouse that is the bigger player? And sometimes they're both equal players in it. So the first thing you got to identify when you talk to somebody is, really trying to find out from what perspective. So for example, if you have two people, they create this business, and then you have one person that's really running the business, right? Like doing that 100% of the time, that person is probably going to ask me questions like, well, do I have to give any, if we're getting a divorce, do I have to give any of this to my spouse? Does she have an interest in it, or does he have an interest in it? Right. Those are the questions that I'm kind of hearing from that person. And even questions like, well, what do I do? I built this whole thing. Is she really entitled to it? Is it marital property? That's really the key question being asked.
So from your state's perspective, and again, this is not legal advice, but just general guidance that you're giving from your perspective in your state, how would it be treated if I am the spouse that is predominantly in the business and I own, or I put most of my time in, and my other spouse has a different job?
Sure. Wisconsin, like California, is a marital property state too. That's one thing that is somewhat important to know here. So, okay, so the backdrop, if I just zoom out here for a minute, using your example, two people get married, then they start this business. One thing you're going to look at is what roles those people played in the business, right? And I was kind of alluding to that. And it's funny because each spouse kind of has a feeling of like their importance in the business, and maybe of equal importance or more important. A lot of times you see the person who's maybe doing the service or the sales, the person who's on the road or on the floor or whatever you might want to call it. The person in that sort of production kind of feels like, hey, this is my business, right? Like I'm putting in the blood, sweat, and tears. Then you have the other spouse that says, well, hold on, wait a second. I helped you with the concept. I helped you with the ideas. I'm doing the books, the accounting, the billing. I'm doing all that stuff behind the scenes. Plus I still have a job. You see that a lot of times, like a second job. Anyways, with all that being said, what states are going to do is probably look at that issue of, well, how much of a role did each person play in it? Okay. That's presuming there's no operating agreement. So Jubin, if I could step back to that for a minute, and unfortunately, a lot of this requires some pre-planning. A lot of business owners, especially couples, because they're in love, right? They don't see any problems ahead. It's smooth sailing. Let's start this business. Great idea. They don't think to put in the hard work like you do in your field, right? Get a patent, protect your product, your idea. They're not thinking, how do I protect myself in the case of the business going bad or the marriage going bad, right? So if they're already married and there's no prenuptial agreement, okay, one thing to think about is is there a post-nuptial agreement that could be done, some sort of written agreement affecting the marriage and how that asset would play into the marriage. That's one thing you could do right now if you're a business owner.
So you're saying how that asset, you mean how the business would play in the context of the marriage. So an agreement that
Correct.
specifically addresses the business.
Correct. You could do that in a post-nuptial agreement, right? You also then in your business are going to have an operating agreement though, which is really, another thing which talks about what roles people play in the business, right? Law firms, for example, at least in our state, cannot be owned by a non-lawyer, right? So I'm married myself. So my wife isn't an owner of the law firm, but she has a marital interest in the business, right? So sometimes you might see some businesses asking a spouse to sign a document, perhaps like a waiver. And those could come in several different forms, like a waiver to a marital interest, either in the operation of a business or a waiver of a marital interest in the actual proceeds, the value of the business.
What's the difference between operational interest versus proceed interest then?
So I think a law firm's a bad example for my state because you're not going to have a non-lawyer operating the business, but let's just talk about any other business. Let's say you're going to sell t-shirts, right? And I don't know, really crazy t-shirt that gets super popular. If one person has the idea and basically says, hey, honey, support me on this, I'm going to go out and do this. Your spouse could sign an agreement that says, I don't have operational control. Okay. But I'm not waiving my right to 1/2 of the value of your business. Okay. And I guess that kind of narrows down who is operating the business itself. That could be in real estate. It could be in a product.
Does that have any advantage at the time of divorce or
Sure.
Because the agreement only addresses operation and not revenue?
Well, it protects the person who's not doing the blood, sweat, and tears because they're thinking, hey, I still have a say in it. Like I don't have a say. I have a say in the value of the business or what I might be entitled to. The person operating the business feels like, yeah, I have a little bit more control. I guess if I could zoom out here for a minute too, I guess we're presuming that it's two couple, like a husband and wife that create this business and they're the only two operators. There's other situations where you might be a member of an LLC or something like that, and you have, or a corporation, there's multiple owners, right?
Right.
So the ones that are the most suspect in a divorce are the ones where you have essentially the sole proprietor, right? And that person is kind of running everything. They're the one that can declare whether or not there's undistributed assets or the value of the business, figure out when to pay their invoices or not, how much to sell, how much production they want to ramp up or not. Those ones are harder to protect, I would say.
I'll say, why is that more susceptible then? It's because
you have 100% control of it. So if you have multiple owners and you own only 50% or maybe 25% or even less, right? Let's say you have 6 business owners, you're going to own a smaller percentage. You have less operational control. Okay, so the other spouse who is now maybe signed an agreement saying, hey, I have no operational control, has less of an argument to say, Jane is pulling all the strings there. I know she's hiding money. I know that she's got other, business that she hasn't collected on, and I'm entitled to more. That's harder to do when you're not a sole proprietor and you're sharing your business with other people because you're accountable to them.
Okay.
And that spouse who isn't in operational control actually has, we're talking about maybe 6 businesses, has 5 other people that they can go to say, give me the true answer on what's going on with this business. We're stuck in divorces sometimes when you have just that sole proprietor. We're totally reliant on that person and the records that they keep and what they tell us. Very difficult. So we have to find ways to prove that they're not being truthful, which happens quite a bit.
Noted. So let me look at this from a slightly different point of view. So let's say that the business is about to be created and the couple has been married for 5 years or whatever.
Okay.
Is it advisable? Well, it is advisable to set up an agreement that controls that asset should there be a divorce. Would that agreement be between the spouses or between the business and the business owners? Do you understand my question? I guess
Sure.
I'm asking, do the couples make an agreement or does the business make an agreement with the couples?
Well, it usually starts, it should be the business, right? The business should be essentially a separate entity outside of the marriage, right? Where you have operators of the business, the marital couple putting together an actual operating agreement for the business and the way that the business is going to be operated, right?
Right.
That should really come first.
Okay. And then the spouses can agree to something, or what would the spouse,
Sure.
would they need an agreement between each other then, or?
They don't. No, you could have a postnuptial agreement that defines that very early on. So say they start the business, I don't know. We'll call it Sheboygan LLC, since that's where I am. Okay.
Okay.
Hopefully there's not a Sheboygan LLC business. So we'll call it Boygan LLC. Boygan LLC starts, and the marital couple says, well, let's do an operating agreement to make it legitimate. Maybe they even need that for financing from a bank, right? So they get this operating agreement together that says, this is who I am in the organization, this is who you are, this is the way that things are conducted, the way we do business. That's one thing. Then the marital couple could say, hey, let's sign a postnuptial agreement. We'll hire lawyers to do that. We'll make sure that it's done in fairness so that in the event we ever break up and split up, we know how Boygan LLC is going to be handled. Okay.
And that would be done by lawyers that are experts in family law, right? That would be the kind of lawyer you go to?
Correct. Right. Yeah. You're going to want to get an operating agreement done by a lawyer who's in that business of doing that, right? Business law area, familiar with that. Postnuptial agreement, family law lawyer, like a guy like me.
Right. And then now let's assume that during the business running, the business generated $100 of income for one of the spouses, not both, just for one. Would then that be considered, because in your state and California, my state, it's community property.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be then considered an asset of the business that would be divided up, or would that be an income of the individual because the other individual really isn't involved? They have their own day job.
Sure. So it really could be both. I mean, there's two questions that we're really asking there. One is, from the business, somebody is actually getting paid. Okay. So we often look to that. Like, are they an actual employee? Okay. As well, are they getting paid a regular salary? Or are they just taking money from their operating account when they need it? Okay. So that kind of
first of all, that's between those two, which would you recommend happen? I mean, if you're giving a recommendation, would you recommend a regular salary or take as you want?
Well, from both ends, I think it's important to have, I think that undistributed income really goes to the property division. So if you need it, if the business is there for the purpose of income to meet your expenses for your family,
right?
For both spouses, whether you're fully involved in it or a little bit further behind, you'd rather see a consistent flow, right?
Okay.
That could be in the form of this like traditional payroll that the business sets up, or it even could be consistent with, draws, right, from the operational account. It could be that. So I think that's the better way to see that from both ends, right? So everyone's very clear, hey, Jimmy's getting paid this amount of money, right?
Right.
When you're doing that and that money's coming in, oftentimes that money then is just getting spent. Where businesses sometimes get into trouble as they build up these operations. I mean, it's a good idea, right? You want to build up reserves. It shows security and safety for your business and employees. However, when you get divorced, suddenly if you have $100,000 or $1 million sitting in an account that's not being used, well, you're going to have a really hard time protecting that now.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? And you could argue, hey, we need that. We need that for the next quarter. We have this plan. And that might be true, but you're going to have to show that, right?
And when you say we need that, you mean the business is saying the business needs that money.
Correct.
Not that the spouses are saying we need that for our expenses.
Correct. Right. Right. I'm saying, yeah, I mean, for the business to protect it, you're going to have to show that, that the money, we want to take people at face value. Number one, that they're telling the truth. You start with that.
Right.
And then if you need other evidence to show, hey, we're holding this because we plan to do, is something that is increasing the value of the business, whether it's the facilities, equipment, or we're making a new hire or something like that, that those components of it. But just on its face, if you're just rolling over that money year after year after year, and you can't show that there's been consistent use of that money by the business, you're going to have a hard time protecting that. That ultimately goes to the valuation of the business, which is what people ask, like, well, what's the value of my business?
Okay.
We're kind of assuming the business is worth something. Sometimes businesses aren't actually worth as much as people think.
In fact, they have more debt than assets. Okay.
Yeah, right. And you might be very happy to say, go ahead and take it. Maybe it's at its early stages and it's not making a lot of money. And you're basically making enough to just like keep it going, and it takes a while for it to grow. One spouse might say, go ahead and have it. Like, I don't want to be involved. I don't want to be on any loans or liens or responsible for anything with the business. And they might just want to be done. If it has value, what people are generally asking though is 3 questions. One, how do I buy out my spouse so I can keep the business going? The other one is, what can we own it together? People ask that, or can we sell it? Okay.
You mean own it together post-divorce?
That's the least popular option, right?
Well, of course, the people don't like each other.
They don't like each other, right? So, but you could do it arguably, right? You could arguably say, hey, we both had an equal share in the growing of this company and getting it to where it's at. And we're both going to continue to co-own the business. The right couple, that's no longer intact might be able to do that. It's the least popular. Normally what you're seeing, the second least popular, I'd say, is selling it, right? That does happen. Businesses do get sold, properties get sold. It's a way to kind of dissolve the business and then have the proceeds to split in the divorce action. So that does happen. But more often or not, it's one party being awarded the business, and then we place a value on that business, okay? And that goes back to your question about like operational accounts, desks, chairs, computers, parties can agree on the value of the business. Or if they don't agree, then oftentimes you're hiring somebody to do a business valuation.
So starting from the beginning and thinking through this, the best thing your recommendation would be is to create some kind of an agreement between the business and the owners as to what happens in the event of a divorce, and an agreement between the spouses, or one or the other.
Yeah. Well, certainly an operating agreement of the business that says, look, in the event of a divorce, this is what happens. Okay. Because your business probably doesn't want the owners being able to transfer shares. Okay. So you could have an operating agreement that, for example, says, hey, I'm in this business, say I'm in business with another person. If I get divorced, my share can't be transferred to my spouse, so that the lone business owner is now doing business with my spouse, right?
Right.
So some sort of operating agreement, but it would talk about what would happen. And then between, a spouse, maybe you have an agreement that, talks about that person's not waiving their value in, or their right to one half of the value of the business if there's 2 business owners, for example. Okay.
And in your experience, let's say we're talking about a business that develops and creates technology, so that it's maybe software as a service, or it's something creating some new piece of technology or an app or whatever. How often are the intellectual property assets of that business questioned and challenged in terms of ownership?
So I guess it's kind of a line I use with my clients. The court system is going to care as much as you care, right?
Okay.
So in terms of how often it happens, it's really a matter of like, how much does the person going through the divorce care? Because you're right. There are a lot of businesses that have something unique. It requires, say I'm representing the person who's, I guess, has the least interest in the business, maybe wasn't the creator, right, of the product and the idea that's unique. If my client thinks that has a lot of value and can see that it's going to have value to the market in 5 or 10 years, well, then we have to come up with a plan for how we value that, right? And not just, we look at a snapshot of the business, but we might be able to project future value. That's a difficult thing.
Very
So
difficult. And I totally agree with you.
Right. Right. I mean,
that's
that's where a guy like you might even come in to say, hey, look, from what I've seen, I know that a product like that could have X amount of value, but that's a tricky one. I mean, you are looking at that and that uniqueness to the market, but it's really a snapshot at the time. So it's again, how much the client cares to go down that road.
Would your analysis change if the intellectual property asset, such as, for example, the trademark or the patent, was assigned to and owned completely by the company?
Yeah, I mean, and that's where we come back to these written agreements: operating agreement, postnuptial agreement, prenuptial agreement, if you already have a business and you're getting married, right? Like, these are all the things that go back to, you're saying basically something unique, protect that, number one, to the market. And then number two, you want to make sure that it stays with the business, right? And, there's some plan in place, whether in the operating agreement and then later a postnuptial agreement or prenuptial agreement, to protect that. If you don't have any of that in place, it's kind of a black hole. And,
Right.
you're
I
dealing
totally
with,
agree.
yeah, this person says it's not worth anything. This person says it's worth a lot. For us as lawyers,
I've got that very situation right now where my client is going through a divorce and the company is being evaluated by him at 0, and it's being evaluated by his spouse at a lot. So
yeah,
there's this debate.
Yeah, totally, a debate. And if the two parties can't figure it out, you go to a court, and a court can't just throw a number in the air. It really can't. And that's not the right way to apply the law. The court has to make a finding of fact. It has to base its decision on something. So a lot of times, and I mean, this is getting away a little bit from the business, but even with personal property, clients are like, well, I don't think it's worth that much, right? And they just kind of feel like they can walk into court and just tell a judge, oh, it's only worth X amount of dollars.
Right.
Yes, you can do that, but it's not very credible. If somebody comes in with a third-party opinion, that's going to carry a lot more weight.
Sure.
So a business valuation, if you have a good business, a good product, you got to get it. You got to get a valuation done, and you're going to that's the right thing to do. We talk about delegation a lot, right? Hire that expert, because me as a lawyer trying to figure it out, I got to bring somebody into court, ask a bunch of questions, try to connect all those dots and hope the judge gets it and then puts the right value on it.
Just get an expert to do it.
Get an expert.
All right, so let me see if I can turn here to see if we have any questions. Nicole, does anyone have any questions that you want to share with us? By the way, Nicole is here in the background helping us, so we appreciate you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. We have just one question that's come in. I guess, is there like one takeaway key that you want to advise either a business owner that was a previous business owner before they came into a marriage or started a business with their spouse? One key takeaway from your experience that you would advise to them?
Yeah. Let's see if I can say it this way. So I'm going to reframe this. There's a saying that I like. Don't be casual with your words. When you're casual with your words, it leads to casualty. Okay. So
well said.
Okay. So that's the same thing with your business. If you're casual with your business, it's going to lead to casualty. So wherever you are in the process right now, watching this video, whether it's today, live, or 20 years from now, you have to get serious about your business today. Okay. And you have to be less casual about it. It's your business, and figure out what you need to do things right. Prenuptial agreement, postnuptial agreement, operating agreements, right? Like, that's just number one, is the key. Do an inventory. What do I have here? What do I do to do better? Talk to somebody like Jubin, talk to somebody like me, ask questions, get education, and you'll come away with at least a better plan for how to protect your business. So there's that.
And I would assume that that's probably a lot easier to do when you and your spouse are on very good terms, as opposed to when you and your spouse are ready to part ways.
It is. And a challenge. And I get it. A lot of people do not want to do a prenuptial or postnuptial agreement because they feel like they're upsetting somebody. If you can get around the corner to explain to your spouse, this is done for your protection, it's done for the other spouse's protection, so that it's very clear and people feel better about that. There's more certainty overall. And it's also clear if you're doing business with other people that they understand what role your spouse plays in this, right? Because people aren't clear about that too. They think, oh, does her husband, is he going to come take my business?
Does
right?
Kyle's wife get to walk into the law firm and tell people what to do?
Right. I mean, you just want to get clear on that. I hope that's helpful. I guess that's the one thing you can do right now is just question, what do I have to do to make this a legitimate business if it's not already? If it is a legitimate business, how do I make it better? Have a conversation. I just want to tell you, postnuptial agreements are less ironclad than a prenuptial agreement just by their nature, because we look at fairness in either one. But prenuptial, before the marriage, it's very clear that somebody had a business already, versus a postnuptial, it's obviously created it together or during that time. So that can be undone a little bit more.
In either scenario, would you recommend that each spouse have their own lawyer, or is it okay to have?
Yeah, for sure. Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, either postnuptial or prenuptial is not going to stand up without each party having their own lawyer, a full disclosure of the business. Or if we talk in general about the whole prenuptial, postnuptial, you have to disclose everything that you have.
Now, some people, Kyle, might say that's a lot of expense to incur, but is it a lot less expense than having to deal with it after the fact?
Yeah, for sure. Right. Okay. Yeah. And that's so hard for us all to get around that, right? Spend the money now, less later. And it's also hard when you're like, why would I even spend the money? We're in love and we're going to be in love for a long time. So I get it. That's really hard. Here's the other quick tip too. You got to think about, is this marital or non-marital? So there are some assets that are not considered marital property. This applies to really most states. Okay. So not, again, legal advice in Wisconsin, though, I can tell you this, that things that are not marital property are things that are inherited by one spouse, things that a gift from somebody other than the spouse. Okay. And you can also lose that marital, non-marital status if you commingle that with the marriage. So you got to make sure, if you are handed a business from your grandfather, that ownership stays in a particular way, that you're not, creating an ownership interest then for your spouse, if that's your plan to protect your, the business. So just make sure you're not doing that.
Yeah, very good point. Thank you. Very good point.
What else? Anything else I can do for you?
Well, we're almost out of time. I'm sure that, Kyle will throw you, if you don't mind, we'll throw your information out so people want to reach out. And I'm sure there's a lot of general advice you can give them, and our information will be available as well. I definitely appreciate you making time, man. I love you for it. Thank you for doing it. It's very kind of you. It's always good to get people educated and let them know what challenges may lie ahead of them, because I don't know what I don't know.
No. Thanks for having me. Love you too, man. Super grateful to be here, and I hope it gives value to people.
I don't have any closing remarks. I think, Nicole, we're good. Are there any other questions that we need to address? We'll take them offline and get back to people on it. Thank you.
All right.
Good, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.